Grace, peace, and welcome to Podcast of the Wills, a podcast that treats Star Wars like a sacred text. I'm your host, Nick Milkey, and we are here on episode 18 of the live show. It's obviously not the 18th Podcast of the Wills overall, but since we transitioned to this new fun Sunday night format, hanging out, having a live chat, having amazing guests on, we have done this 18 weeks in a row. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit proud. I don't know how many other things I've done 18 weeks in a row. But it's been such a fun journey. I've had so many great guests, and tonight is no exception. We're going to get to her in a few minutes. I do want to take care of a little bit of business right up front. I want to thank everybody for joining us. If you're with us live on Sunday night and you're in the live chat, I see JD, I see Matthew. I know we've got other folks that are going to be joining us as we go along tonight. Thank you for joining us live, hanging out, being a part of the conversation. Scotty's here. What's up, Scotty? And if you are listening on the podcast version, the audio version, thank you also for listening, participating. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WillsPod. We want to interact with you. You're just as important to the show as the live guests or the live audience on Sunday night. This is it's a whole podcast environment. I don't know if that's really what we call this, but we're going to go with it. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being a part of the show. And last week, we had Jamie Cosley, who joined us, and Jamie was a lot of fun to talk to and hear about his work, drawing cartoons for Star Wars Insider magazine. And Jamie was very generous to offer to one of our listeners this amazing drawing. I need to blow this up full screen because it deserves the attention. Jamie drew this and said, "Hey, I want to give this away to one of your listeners." So we did a contest from last week. I had folks message me on Twitter and send me what were Jamie's top 7 planets that we went through. And so I have those entries. There's not a ton, which works well for those that did enter. And I'm going to put them in my little Holochronicles koozie. I've got the papers with names on it. We're doing this old fashioned. We're not doing any of these digital picker things. So we're going to shake it up. I'm going to pull out the name of a winner, and we're going to get that out to you in the mail this week. So here we go. Let's see what happens. Who's going to win this amazing drawing that I'm definitely jealous of? The winner is David Drennan. I don't know if, camera. There we go. David Drennan from As Father and Son. Congratulations, my friend. You are a winner. I will get your information, your address to Jamie this week, and he will get that in the mail to you. So congratulations. That is super fun. Like I said, I'm jealous of you. But that's awesome. I'm excited you get to add that to your collection. And I want to thank Jamie again for being willing to do that. That was very kind to share some of his art, and I know he will be excited for it to be in David's collection. So congrats on that. Yep, Michael said it himself. Congrats, David. So good job out of you. And we're going to keep this moving. I have an amazing guest tonight, and I was actually telling her right before we went on that I feel like the galaxy is communicating with me and trying to send me a message. I wasn't paying attention, obviously, the first couple of weeks, but purely by the luck of the draw, 2 weeks ago, we had on Alex Segura and Alex Robinson. Alex Segura, of course, is the president of Archie Comics and has been involved in comic books. He's doing stuff with Project Money on NPR. Alex Robinson is a comic book artist in his own right. He's done graphic novels, has amazing drawings, host of Star Wars Minute. And then last week, we had Jamie Cosley, who draws comics for Star Wars Insider magazine, other comics, Blue Scar, which is his Patreon comic book. And so by coincidence, and I guess the fate of the Wills, as it were, my guest tonight is Heather Antos. And Heather Antos is also a comic book superstar. She is an editor at IDW and Image Comics, which is and we'll talk about kind of a new old job that she has. She has worked for Marvel, Star Wars, Disney, Valiant Comics. She has been involved in all these great things. And so I am so thrilled that she is going to join me tonight to hang out. And as I said, it is clearly the galaxy telling me I need to pay more attention to comic books than I already do. So without further ado, let me welcome Heather Antos.
Woo!
Hey.
Hey.
You're here.
I am.
Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. And I don't know, I kind of feel like I should hop off right now and tell you to go read some comics and then we'll talk.
Do my homework and then talk.
I'm just saying.
You're right. And if the topic tonight in the top 7, if it was purely comics, I definitely would have had to do that. But since we're going droids, I feel like I'm a little bit conversant and I can hang at least for the droid talk. But I'm going to do some homework and I'll have to get you back on at a future date so that you can quiz me and make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to.
Well, then we can do my top 7 Star Wars comics. That's what we
There we go. Absolutely. That sounds like an excellent plan. Well, before we get into more about Heather, we have some important business to do right up front. And when I emailed you about this and you were excited about it, I knew I had found another good Podcast of the Wills guest, another kindred spirit. So we're going to make our cocktail tonight. As I've said pretty much every week since I started doing this, I'm trying to be the Stanley Tucci of Star Wars podcasts. All his Instagram videos in his fancy kitchen making cocktails during the quarantine. I looked at that and I went, I like cocktails. I host an internet TV show. Why can't I do that too? So here we are all these weeks later, all these different cocktails, adding things to my home bar that I didn't have previously, because normally it's just like whiskey and a glass and a piece of ice. And so tonight, we have no exception. I'm going to get my little recipe card up here on the screen if I can get the buttons to work right. What we are making tonight, I have called Heather's Bad Motivator. And I feel like that works with the droid theme. It's got some edge to it, which I think is appropriate. So what we have, and let me do this on screen as usual. Try not to spill it on my computer. We have a Return of the Jedi Burger King glass, which is a go-to mode. I said 2 ounces of gin. I'm making a double and I'm just pouring. So we're just going to pour some gin in here.
Perfect.
We're going to go with some cranberry juice, about like that. We're going to top it off with some seltzer. I have some lime, Kirkland Costco. Thanks to the fine folks at Costco. Some lime seltzer. And then, all right, I'm going to need an extra hand here for a minute. Audio listeners, thanks for hanging in. This doesn't translate as well to audio, but trust me, we're doing good work here. So we've got that, and then I've got a wedge of lime. I'm just going to kind of shoot that bad boy in there. I know it looks nice on the glass, but it just needs to go in the drink.
It tastes better inside. Yeah,
it works much better inside. So sure. we have Heather's Bad Motivator, and I raise my glass to you, ma'am. Cheers, and thanks for being here tonight.
It's funny, actually, when you suggested this. I think this is switch out the gin for the bourbon, and it's the exact same drink I made at Thanksgiving this year.
Excellent. Well, now I know what I'm going to do later this week.
Try it with bourbon. Yeah,
that's right. Make that swap. Well, you are here to tell us a little bit about your work, to tell us a little bit about you. Let's start with your Star Wars origin story. When you first saw Star Wars, kind of growing up with it. Tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind, ma'am.
Yeah, so I grew up well after the original trilogy was released. I'm a child of the 90s, and but I grew up watching, Indiana Jones, James Bond, Star Wars with my father. It was definitely something that we bonded over. I was way more into Indiana Jones as a kid than I was the original trilogy. But when the prequels hit, that was my prime time because I was a kid. I was a kid when those came out. And I was very fortunate that the small town I grew up in took all of us, the entire school, to go see Phantom Menace as like a kind of end of the year field trip sort of thing. And if anyone who's around for the prequels knows that they went all out with their merchandising as they normally do. And so there was a book series that they had that came out that was kind of like the journals of all the characters. So you could get Anakin's journal and Padme's journal of, their experiences. And I had read all of those and was obsessed with those books. So going in, I was ready for this movie. And I fell in love. It was everything I could have ever wanted. I think I was second grade, third grade, something like that when it came out. And I loved it so much that I hid in the theater to stay when my class left so I could watch it again.
Excellent.
Needless to say, I got in a lot of trouble, but apparently not enough trouble that they kept me from seeing Attack of the Clones in theaters when our school took us to see that. I got to see all 3 prequels as a class field trip.
That's amazing. I definitely got cheated when it comes to field trips because they didn't take us to any movies. And of course, I grew up and went to school in the in-between times between the original trilogy and the prequels. So it wasn't available, but they could have taken us to like Roger Rabbit. I don't know. There was something else they could have taken. Maybe not Roger Rabbit, but
yeah, maybe not that one. But yeah, no, for
but
sure.
Still, movie theater field trip sounds awesome.
I definitely lucked out. I mean, granted, I'm from like a really small town, and like my movie theater still, if you go there, I was just talking about this with my mom on the phone. Like our tickets are $5. $5 for a ticket, $3 for a soda. Like my movie theater's the 1980s. It has not
Love it. Love it. Yeah. I grew up in Selma, Alabama, and we had a similar, very small movie theater. It was 2 screens. And at one point, and I kid you not, they showed, I think it was Boys in the Hood when it came out in the 90s. That movie stayed for like 8 months, and they just rotated other movies around it because it was so popular in the town that I lived in.
For sure.
So, you know, small town movie theater, there's certainly some fun there. So you definitely connected with Star Wars. I love what you said about connecting with Star Wars because of your dad and Indiana Jones. And if I can shout out, I have 4 daughters, and I think most of them are watching on TV inside the house right now. But my twins, Harper and Lily, who turned 13 yesterday.
Congratulations.
They
Happy
also,
birthday if you're watching.
That's right. They both also, I say this every week, and I know a lot of my regular listeners are tired of hearing it, but we have this parallel journey where Harper loved Star Wars and has always loved Han Solo, but Lily loved Indiana Jones and of course and it was that light bulb moment when they were like 3 or 4 and they realized that it was the same
person.
And I grew up of course with those movies, and that's how I ended up pushing them on. I have all girls, so you know, they have to get dad's nerdery whether they like it or not, and luckily they do, so it's worked out. But that's fun that you got that with your dad and you got it kind of through Indiana Jones, and so I definitely connect with that. But then to have those books and the movie theater experience, it really was kind of a prime time to grow up, I would think, with those prequels.
For sure. Yeah. Like I was the right age. Like I was the same age as Jake Lloyd, and, you know, Padme was the cool kick-ass, you know, like older sister that I wanted, you know, and she was always that character that was growing up with that right age with me. And yeah, like I understand why people who grew up with the original trilogy hated the prequels. And I definitely get why, you know, even people my age now are like, oh no, it's not cool to like them. I love them. I think they're great. Like, yeah, the CGI isn't the greatest, but I definitely really appreciate those movies. And even like, you know, everyone's like Attack of the Clones is one of the worst ones. That's probably my favorite prequel. Like, I think it's super fun. I definitely appreciate the tackiness of it.
For sure.
You know, like in the cringe moments. My favorite, I don't know if you've never seen it, Google Tommy Wiseau Star Wars, and someone did a cut of all the Anakin Padme scenes, but with Tommy Wiseau, and it's the greatest thing ever.
It's fabulous. And in fact, this is a great point because you're talking about Attack of the Clones. Today is the 19th birthday of Attack of the Clones.
It is, I know.
Which is a big deal. And I know everybody, you know, part of the conversation is, you know, by the time we get Celebration next year in Anaheim, it will be that 20th anniversary, which Star Wars tends to celebrate those big, you know, 20s and 40s and whatever, which is awesome. But especially it's very relevant because, of course, half the day on Twitter today, a lot of the things I have seen have been about Attack of the Clones. And I think I agree with you, too, that, you know, I was in college when Phantom Menace came out. And so I saw it, and to have had my expectations as high as they were. And, of course, this was relatively internet days. You know, my expectations were felt like they were dashed against the rocks at the time. But of course I stuck with it. I saw it multiple times, and I spent a little bit of time going, ugh, those are the worst. I don't care. But I feel like as I age, as I pay attention to kind of the overall big picture of Star Wars, I really do appreciate them more and more, you know, not only for what they put in the lore, but the actors. And honestly, I'm affected by the real life fact that like Jake Lloyd had a really hard time when this was all over with. Ahmed Best struggled really bad with the way the fans were and the difficulties of all of it. And again, when it comes down to it, they're movies and they're fun. And if it's not for me, it's for somebody else.
Yep.
So I definitely have a not newfound, but a growing reappreciation for those movies. And again, part of it is watching them with my kids. And when my kids were smaller, those were the ones they gravitated to because they were a little more like cartoons and a little bit shinier and, some of that. So I definitely think they have an important place in this canon and in this lore. And so I always love hearing from people who that was their most direct growing up Star Wars experience like you. So you grew up with Star Wars in a really fun way. You get the originals with your dad, you get the prequels in school, best school ever. And so then you go to college, you grow up, you become an adult, as we all pretend to be sometimes. And you get to go to work and you work in comic books. And so, a lot of times I've also been really lucky on this podcast, not only with the last 3 weeks with the comic book folks, but even beyond that, having somebody who runs the top Star Wars card trader app and the guy that runs the Old Republic video game, the online one. I get to talk to all these people who their job is Star Wars. And I mean, if that's not the dream, I don't know what is. So tell us about that. Tell us about your work in comics and, coming to that. Certainly it was informed, I'm sure, by Star Wars, those journals you talked about.
Yeah. I mean, I've always, my mom says I drew comics before I knew what comics were. I've always been a super creative person, writing, drawing. I studied theater and film in school, and but telling stories in a visual medium has always been a huge fascination of mine. And throughout college, I was an avid comics reader. I wrote for a couple entertainment websites just as something to do. But I never really envisioned that comics was a possible career path, which is funny because I literally interviewed creators for that position of writing. But it wasn't until a friend told me you should do comics, you should, pursue that I realized, oh yeah, people do this for a living.
not just the people you interviewed, but it's available for you too.
Right. Well, it's not like they have, on career day, the writer of Batman comes to your school, right? There's only literally one of those, right. It's not as ubiquitous as being a teacher or a doctor or something like that. And, honestly, as soon as my friend suggested it, it was my, the light bulb moment where literally it wasn't a matter of if, but a matter of when.
Sure.
And I just began researching different positions, how could my skill set that I have really carry over, and what would I be interested in? And after a while, I learned about the role of an editor. And I did what any good millennial does, and I started tweeting editors in comics. Twitter wasn't as much as of the hellscape as it is now. It was still early days of Twitter, and so I think I got lucky where people would actually respond to me.
Sure.
But I know
that's how I get guests on this show.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you get lucky. But that's how I met Jordan White, who's an editor at Marvel at the time. And he was going to be at C2E2. I was going to be at C2E2. And he explained to me what it was a comic editor does. I left that show knowing this is it. This is what I want to do. And I really hit the ground running with self-publishing and did a lot of projects. And at the time, I launched one of the most successful comics Kickstarter projects, which is how I ran into Jordan White again later that same year at New York Comic Con, right after it was announced that they were getting Star Wars.
Right.
It was that year. And I showed him, here's some of the stuff I've done since we've last talked. He said, would you ever be willing to move to New York? I said, absolutely. 1 month later, I was interviewing. 2 months later, I was hired and moved out to New York and was making Star Wars comics.
That's amazing. Well, and you talked about how, part of this journey as you ran into Jordan, talked about these moments about what a comic book editor does. Tell us a little bit about the role of a comic book editor, what that looks like, kind of what those duties are. Because
Yeah.
in my mind, I have an idea, but I don't know that I actually know.
Yeah, no, and it it varies a little publisher to publisher. It varies a little, creator owned to licensed IP. But really, I like to say you're a part-time creative director, part-time therapist, part-time glorified babysitter. No, the closest comparison for a comic book editor, I would say, is much akin to a TV or film producer,
Okay.
which is where, growing up studying film, like that really carried over. Your job is to bring a creative idea from literally idea to completed project, cast it, maintain a budget, and hit all your deadlines, and do it for 15, 20 different things all at once. And so I am in charge of, on average, 15 to 20 different books every single month.
Okay.
And when you're working for a licensed IP like Star Wars, it is us at the publisher or in tandem with Lucasfilm saying, we need a Darth Vader book, we need, a Princess Leia book, we need a whatever, and then going to talent and finding the right talent to bring those stories to life, with all the approvals processes and giving notes on scripts, on art, on letters, every single month to get those books out to you guys.
Sure. Well, and I would imagine that, especially in this new, Disney era, but probably even before, that would involve things like, you work with the story group as far as like story canon, connecting points, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a very, very close relationship. Every contact. So I have a main contact at Lucasfilm, a main editor there, who then sources, depending on what it is, to the right members of story group. But mainly with comics, we work primarily with Matt Martin. Pablo is involved with stuff, and every once in a while, Pablo, Leland, and Matt are probably the most common people involved. And it's great coming back. Now at IDW, I'm working on Star Wars again, and last week I got a script back that was my first script I had sent to them with notes on it, and one of the first comments was Matt saying, "Welcome back, Heather." It was really sweet.
That's fantastic. Well, and that's another one of those things that, as a Star Wars fan and knowing the things that I know about Lucasfilm and the story group and that kind of things, like those three names that you listed, Pablo and Leland and Matt, like that's a group of people that I want to sit down and have a beer with and just listen to them talk about the things that they talk about, and
For sure.
hear those stories, because I love the varying Twitter presences that they all have, and unfortunately, like you said, the hellscape of Twitter sometimes makes that impossible to exist in, and so I know they've had to deal with that on certain levels, however works best for them. But those are people that I look at and go, man, I bet those are fun people to hang out with.
They're super cool. If you ever get a chance, I mean, they're great. They're lovely, lovely, lovely people.
Absolutely. Well, and so even, and you tweeted about this the other day, as you were coming back to Image and IDW to do the work that you're doing now, you were there before, left, and like you said, it's kind of come full circle and you're returning to do this work. And of course, I was immediately intrigued in the tweet that you put up that said, I've only just gotten here and we already have exciting ideas for more Star Wars stories and Star Wars comics. And so obviously I'm not going to ask you to tell us about that, but it has to be exciting as a fan. And again, as a fan who gets to work in Star Wars, just the thrill of that. I mean, just talk about the experience of that, not necessarily the projects themselves, but just that feeling.
It's so, I've been a hardcore Star Wars fan my entire life, and leading up to even getting the position at Marvel, like I was part of a Star Wars tabletop game with the same group that had gone on for 6 years, like Star Wars. You can't really see my apartment, but literally my whole apartment is Star Wars, decorated, and
love it.
leaving Marvel and leaving those books was a really, really tough decision, but it was the right step for my career at the time. But my goal has always been to get back to Star Wars officially in some capacity. And so when the gig at IDW opened up, I applied and was hoping, like, fingers crossed, like maybe they'll get Star Wars. And during the interview process, John Barber, the editor-in-chief, he was like, "So how do you feel about Star Wars?" And that's when I knew. I was like, "Yes, this is happening." And
did you have that little moment where you're like, "Play it cool, play it cool"? I just gotta, or did you just?
No, for sure. But yeah, like coming back to Star Wars, it is truly like coming home in a weird way. Like, I already know everyone that I'm working with, like the Star Wars,
awesome.
The Star Wars community and the Star Wars creative community is a very small, tight-knit group. And so it's very surreal and weird. And I was talking with Mike Seglain, who's the creative director for Disney and Lucasfilm Publishing, for those who don't know. And I was talking to him that my knowledge of where the franchise was going and the universe, like, we're just getting to the point where like the stuff I knew was happening was starting to like fade. And so to come back in, like, right as, it's like perfect timing. Like, oh, I'm not going to miss anything. I know everything.
That's right. Well, and we have, we talk, all the different podcasts, which there's only like 76,000 Star Wars podcasts. So, I'm lucky to be one of those few. But we talk a lot about, the embarrassment of Star Wars riches that we're in right now between Disney Plus, the shows. We've got Bad Batch now, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on these first couple of Bad Batch episodes, but High Republic, which is books and comics and, all these other things. And it's all this to come. And so for you to come into that, because part of what I think is so fun about the comics is y'all get the opportunity to kind of fill in those in between stories or a backstory or develop, something else or some other character more in another way. And so again, the possibilities are almost seemingly endless at this stage.
It really is something special, especially when I was at Marvel and we were launching those first, couple of books where we were telling specifically stories in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and like, the two most popular Star Wars films easily, those are the top two of people's favorites. And like, how do you tell a story that you already know where it's going? How do you fill in those gaps and make it special and make it something interesting and different and fresh? And one of the coolest things that we got to do, spoiler alert, if you haven't read them, read them. What are you doing? They've been out for 6 years now. But we got to tell the story of how Darth Vader found out that the guy who blew up the Death Star was his son, was Luke Skywalker. And it was funny, like, going into that, I didn't realize that, like, oh yeah, by the time Empire happens, he knows the boy's name is Skywalker.
Yep.
So the fact the story group let us tell that story in a comic book and tell it between the two, the two series, and it was really cool and really special and really changes the way that I now view Empire. Like, going in and watching Empire, it totally changes the experience.
No doubt. And isn't that delivered by Boba?
Yeah.
The name and that whole, so that even gives, that paints Boba in a new light for the little bit that we kind of, not that we complain, we do complain, we're Star Wars fans, but, that thing, I grew up not being as infatuated with Boba Fett as a lot of other people were, because he was cool and the helmet was good, but like, he has like 7 or 9 minutes of total screen time between the two movies.
And he's blind for half of them.
That's right. And he, and he dies in kind of a punk way because he gets knocked into the thing with his jetpack. And so, of course, when we come full circle to him in Mandalorian, I'm like, okay, he really is the best bounty hunter in the world and all that. But like you said, knowing that about the comic book and that in-between story paints even him in a new light, and it paints Empire in a new light. So that really is a neat tool, but more than that, an opportunity that you get to, be a part of those stories.
Yeah, it's super cool to like. I mean, Jocasta Nu, the librarian from the Jedi Temple. We got to tell
Mm-hmm.
cool stories with her and the Darth Vader comic, and like it's really cool to like find those like characters or those like one line anecdotes and tell those stories and really fill in those details. And um what's so fun too is when I was at Marvel, I really wanted to tell middle grade and YA stories. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
tell comics for kids, and they just weren't interested in doing that at the time. And I remember when IDW got had the announcement that they were getting those, I was so upset because that's what I wanted to be doing. And so, like, again, it's so full circle. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to just to further tease, my tweet that I had the other day. I when I was on the phone with Siglaine, I was like, so remember, these stories I wanted to do at Marvel, like X, Y, and Z, that they weren't interested. Like, what do you think about doing them here? It's like, absolutely. And
That's
so,
so awesome.
it's really exciting to like have this stuff that's been literally sitting in my back pocket for 3 years now that I can actually start working on. It's
That's
super, it's the best.
Oh, that's amazing. I can't imagine how fun that is. I got excited for you before you came on earlier this week when I was out here in my studio. And I had this little stack of comic books. Like I told you, have never been a huge comic book person. I have a handful of them. And so I have Shattered Empire, and over my shoulder, I've got a couple of the Princess Leia's, and I open up all three of them. And sure enough, right here on the inside, it says Heather Antos. And I'm going, how great is that? Like, that's a part of, I can't imagine that ever gets old whenever you pick up a copy and you get to see your name in it and go, I got to do this.
It's the weirdest thing. Like it's still, and that's how I know, like, I'm in the right job and doing the right thing, is that like, it still doesn't feel real 7 years into my career.
That's awesome.
And like the feeling that we get every time we're in the theater of the opening crawl and hear, the main theme go, and like it's that feeling, like every day getting to work on this stuff. Like it's the best job. I have the best job.
That's amazing. It honestly reminds me, and shout out to anybody that's listening, that is one of my favorite TV shows of all time is The West Wing. And there's a great scene early on when Charlie comes in to be the president's assistant, and he's standing there behind the camera as the president goes to do this live announcement. And he says to the guy next to him, he goes, I've never felt this way before. And the other guy that works with the president looks at him and he goes, it doesn't go away. And so I have to imagine that that's very real for you, and like you said, to have that affirmation that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, because you have that excitement and you have that feeling every day that your job is something that is that exciting and makes you that happy. So that's phenomenal. I absolutely congratulate you for that.
Thank you.
Well, you are definitely a comics expert. You're definitely somebody who has a lot of interest. I know you do cosplay stuff sometimes along the way. I've seen some of that on your Twitter feed. But you are a very vocal, in the best way, lover of droids. I too love the droids, and so that made it very easy when we were talking. And I'm so glad you suggested this, because my first suggestion was just kind of boring and easy and whatever. And you said, what about droids? And immediately I was like, first of all, I'm embarrassed that I didn't suggest it. But yes, so tonight, as we transition into our top 7 list, and as we get our screen up here, we're going to talk about Heather's top 7 Star Wars droids. Droids are the best. Droids, cover so much ground. They do so much. They add so much to the stories. And so we're going to dive right in. I'm going to get number 7 up here on the screen, and I want you to tell us, why you chose each one.
Yes.
And let's start there, because, well, first of all, before we do that, droids overall, tell us about your affinity for droids overall.
I don't know. I mean, people suck. I think we all know that. Like, people cause the most trouble in Star Wars, and droids are the ones that get you out of trouble. They're very handy. They're logical. And some of them are cute and great companions, and other of them are badasses that are gonna, save your butt, literally.
That's right.
And some are both. And so you can never go wrong with the droid. There's no such thing as a bad droid.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. So as we jump into number 7, we have IG-11.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's Taika. Like, you know?
It is Taika. That's really all we need.
Yeah, it's Taika Waititi as a droid. Like, that's done, but done, game over. Like, you don't need anything else. I mean, he was super fun. My favorite character to come out of Mandalorian, hands down. Like, everyone's going on about this like Baby Yoda character. Taika is a bounty hunter droid. That's correct. What more do you need?
What more do you need? And I agree with that on 100% every level, because I say all the time that one of the hills that I choose to die on is that Thor Ragnarok is the best of the MCU movies. And it's every reason because of Taika not only directing the tone, the whatever, but then Korg. Like, why can't you not love Korg? Korg talking about handing out pamphlets at his mom's boyfriend. Like, Taika is, Taika makes everything. And IG-11 to me was so fun, of course, when we get, that first episode of Mandalorian, or second episode, whenever, it was the first one, because we had IG-88 before this. And, the original IG-88, of course, was bolted to the floor in that Death Star set, or the Star Destroyer set in Empire, when he's talking to all the bounty hunters, and like, it looked cool, but there wasn't really, a lot to him other than this kind of creepy, scary looking thing. Then we get it in animation for a minute, and it was almost like it flipped around and, jumped and did some things. And so to see a real practical version of an IG assassin droid, as he walked through the middle of that little town square with Mando in that first episode, spinning, rotating, shooting, you're like, oh, I get it.
Like, oh, this is a droid that means business. Like, I don't want to go up against this droid. I don't.
Correct. It made sense why he had the job that these IG droids had the job they did.
Absolutely.
But like you said, melded perfectly with that was the humor of Taika and, the self-destruct bit where he's going to self-destruct and he keeps telling him to stop.
Yes.
Like, it killed me. And automatically I was like, I'm hooked on this show if for another reason than this guy right here. And so I love that, he gets back, he gets rebuilt by Kuil. And then, of course, my favorite Easter egg coming out of, I guess that second season is the statue of him outside the school, which had such a Little House on the Prairie feel, where they turned the bar into a schoolhouse, and, the statue of the Savior droid outside. So IG-11 is a worthy number 7 entry on the list. Let's jump over to number 6. And I'm very excited to hear about this one. We have R2HA.
Yes. So R2HA, I had to put on this list because, and in case you didn't know, my initials are HA. And in case you also didn't know, this droid appeared in the Poe Dameron comic series. Is written by Charles Soule and drawn by Phil Noto. And honestly, this is just a self-serving thing. Charles named this droid after me. Specifically because he knows how much I love droids. Phil painted it pink and purple because they're my favorite colors. And she's a great astromech who sacrifices herself in order to help the rebellion. And she's the best droid.
That's so fantastic. And actually, it's not self-serving at all, because if I had a Star Wars droid named after me, it would be all 7 selections on this list. So so the fact that you stuck her even so high up the list, I mean, you have your own droid. No one would have blamed you if it was number 1. But that is so cool. And I love, the ability to do those things. We had several weeks ago, before we did, I had Alex Segura and Alex Robinson on 2 weeks ago, and they talked about comics and some of that kind of stuff. But I had Alex Robinson a month or 2 ago, and we talked about his top 7 Star Wars names. And so, of course, we got into, kind of the Tuckerization that tends to happen in Star Wars, where they take, George Lucas and make it Jorg Sakul, or, Matt Martin's a great example. His character in Rebels is Mart Matin. Yeah. And so I love, anytime you get that real world connection My other favorite is I've got some friends, Rebecca and Andrea, who are really good friends with Alex Segura. And so in the Poe Dameron Freefall novel, he named Beekmans and Vigilch, two of the kind of main bad guy characters in that book, are named after Rebecca and Andrea. And so it's just fascinating to me to see, you know, those connections, the homage that, like you said, Charles Soule was like, hey, here's your droid. So can't beat that at all. Well, excellent. Well, number 5 coming up, 000.
Yes. So 000 is another droid from the comics. He first appears in Darth Vader number 3, and he is a protocol droid, much like C-3PO, but where a C-3PO wants to serve humans, 000 wants to drain them of their blood and experiment on them. So what's not to love?
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything that we need in the world after all the putting up with C-3PO that we've had over the years, it's to have the polar opposite of C-3PO.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he's just delightfully evil. You know, all he wants to do is just destroy and kill humans. And you know, in his series, he's constantly being told by Darth Vader and Dr. Aphra that no, we have to keep them alive for now, and the restraint is real. And I'm currently, or I just finished listening to the Dr. Aphra audiobook where the actor who does the voice acting for 000 is just a delight and is so much fun. I highly, highly recommend listening to the audiobook of that, just so you can hear this delightfully evil C-3PO.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that, you know, and in my head canon, he's definitely the yin and the yang to, you know, the yang to to 3PO's yin, you know, the light and the dark. That really works. And that's such a great, and again, even just the design of it, give it red eyes and make it black. And all of a sudden 3PO is much creepier than he ever was before.
Super. Well, and you don't see it in this version of the art, but there's a version of this art where he has needles.
The knives, needles and knives coming out of his fingers. I saw that when I was looking for this. And it also makes me think about, and I don't remember the number, but there's the white 3PO droid that shows up, I think, in Empire at some point, kind of passing in the background. And it's that other moment where you're like, oh, they don't all have to be copper and gold. They can be, you know, something else. So that's fascinating.
There is a in one of the comics where 000 actually paints himself gold in order to try and take Luke Skywalker hostage, and he like pretends to be C-3PO, and it's
amazing.
It's very fun.
Again, see, things that I need to be informed of because I don't read comic books. So we've clearly got our theme for the night, which is Nick needs to read more comic books. All right, so number 4, moving right along, BD1. And let me say up front before I hear your thoughts about BD1, I was late to the PlayStation game. I was late to everything. I got a PlayStation 4 actually just a couple of months ago. And so I have been playing catch up on the Battlefront storyline and Squadrons. And I just finished Fallen Order earlier this last week. And so BD1 is very fresh, not only in my mind, but in my heart, and fantastic.
I love BD1 so much. Like, honestly, if we're talking like current or fresh in your mind favorite droids, like BD1 is up there for me. Like, I love BD1 so much. He's so adorable and curious and like just wants to help. Like, he just wants to help and find things. And, you know, he reminds me of a puppy. Like, he really just wants to please you. And look at this cool thing I found. Isn't this going to help you out? Like, he's adorable. And one of my coworkers for Christmas in 2019 got me a BD1 throw blanket. That my dog, Dr. Shelly Lona Afra, has taken over. So she also loves her droids too. And like BD1 is just the best. I love BD1. I want my own personal BD1. If I could have any of these droids as my own personal droid, I would have a BD1 in a heartbeat.
I agree with you completely. And I think that, my number one choice and your number one choice are the same in this list. So it would be really hard to put those two up against each other. But for a lot of the reasons that you described, BD1 would be right up there at the top of the list. And playing through the game, I know it kind of was, it was a programming choice and whatever, but like every single time I opened one of those crates and he dove in there and the lid shut
And he's
while
so
he rooted
excited.
it,
Yeah.
he's so excited. I lived for that moment every time I found a chest. It didn't annoy me that Cal didn't get to reach in and get. I was like, go get it, buddy. Let's see what we got.
Yeah. No, he's such a team player, and like again, like I really feel like he just wants to make you happy. Like
that's right.
And it's very good. Very, very good.
Very, very good. So that's an excellent and worthy number 4, possibly deserving of even higher, but there's other great droids. So we go to number 3 and we have BB-8.
BB-8, yes. And honestly, like BB-8 and BD-1, it was really, really, really tough for me, but I chose BB-8 a little higher because I think we know him a little bit more. And
sure.
And me personally, I have a very close relationship with BB-8 because of the Poe Dameron comics, as mentioned before. For those of you who don't know, in the comics, whenever a non-basic speaking creature or entity is speaking, like your droids and Wookiees, the writers actually write out in English what it is that they're saying.
Right.
And so like I have entire scripts where BD-8 is just like saying nasty things about Terex's mustache, and the Poe Dameron comics, and talking about how great and cool Poe Dameron is, and I love that jacket, and just really, really, he's Poe Dameron's hype man. But I created the audible whistle written language. Like literally I have a diagram that I created where this is what these sound effects like translate to. And Lucasfilm caught wind that I did that, and then they took it from me and they've handed it out to all the other licensees as BB-8's language, which is
so awesome,
weird and cool.
Mm-hmm. That's so awesome. Well, and that's so interesting, like you said, and we've kind of heard that a little bit before. And it's interesting when you look at different droids across the spectrum of, like, I'm hearing you say that about BB-8 and the conversations, the things he says, ragging on somebody's mustache, hyping up Poe. And then I compare. So if I'm comparing 3, I'm comparing BB-8, who seems to me like a young, positive, energetic, like kind of bouncy. Like I'm trying to build, the image in my mind of like the personality.
14. Like I picture him as like 14.
Absolutely. And so then you've got R2, which we'll talk about R2 in a little bit, and he's a little saltier. He's a little more aged and worn. And then you've got Chopper, and Chopper is this whole other, like, Chopper's the one you can't let your kids around because of the things he's going to say. He's the uncle, like the drunk Thanksgiving uncle that just says whatever he wants to. But it's also been neat, when we got some of the behind the scenes footage when Force Awakens came out. And of course we get BB-8, and I love, that viral video when he comes out on the stage. I think it was at Comic-Con that first time, and everybody's like, oh, holy cow, like this, they really did it. They made one, all of that. But like, I love having, gosh, I just blanked on the two guys' names, John Ralphio and what's his name from Saturday Night Live, doing those noises and doing kind of like what you're talking about, like adding that vocal presence to all of it. And then the same thing, like, especially when you watch, the more I watch Rebels and the more I watch Chopper, like I know what Chopper's saying. And like, you can almost like, it's more of like like it's words, and you can pick it up even more.
But that's what's so important in the movies and TV shows and video games. Like we get that audible, we can hear it, and we can tell like if they're excited or if they're scared or hesitant, we can get that through the sounds. But in the comics, you can't actually hear it. And so it was really tricky and very important that we were able to capture that same feeling as best as possible. And so to be able to like do that for BB-8 was just so much fun.
No, that's really fascinating. That's so cool. So as we move from BB-8 to number 2, we have Gonk.
Gonk. Yes. So Gonk is one of my favorite droids, obviously, of all time. So much so that I have a little Gonk necklace.
Love it.
That I wear and his legs move. But I love Gonk. I think Gonk is just adorable. And we need more of him. And I want to know more of his stories. And you can learn more of his stories in some of the Star Wars comics that I've done. There's some backup stories where it's Gonk Droid adventure and drawn by Chris Eliopoulos. And he did one for me too with R2. You can see.
Look at that.
So my amazing. 2 favorite droids.
There they are.
Spoiler alert. And he's the best, and I want to know more. I think he's the real star of Star Wars, and George Lucas had it wrong.
I love that. You hear that, George? I'm sure he's watching tonight, so I'm glad. I hope he takes that to heart. Well, and I agree with you. And it's one of those things that when I went to Celebration in Orlando in 2017. Walking around that show floor, of course, there were, plenty of R2s and droids, the droid builders, the folks that had the different R units driving around, rolling around. I'm sure I posed with several of them to get pictures taken, but maybe because they're more common even here, if the minor league baseball team has a, Star Wars night, there's likely to be an R2 rolling around. But I was walking around that Celebration convention floor and there was a Gonk at one of the booths. And I was like, I have to get a picture with him because, again, for me, original trilogy inside that sandcrawler and that thing. And so then,
they're so distinct. Like that's the thing that I really like about the Gonk Droid is that's a Gonk Droid. Period. Like there's no, it's at an R4 and R2. Like what is it? No. I agree with you 100%. Gonk never whined about going to Tashi Station.
That's right.
Never once. He was just happy to be there.
He was just happy to be there. And for me too, as a kid, I wish I could remember now. Gonk looks like an old gas pump, and he looks like the ones before the digital that still had the dials on it that I grew up with. And so I remember as a kid thinking, oh, it's the gas pump droid. It's the gas pump droid. And then one day I figured out, he has a name, but again, those shuffling little plodding feet. So again, another gift that the Mandalorian has given us is that first time that Mando goes to see, Werner Herzog, and he goes in that, and there's a Gonk just shuffling along, leading him down the thing, and you just can't beat that.
Yeah, it's no, yeah. I mean, Gonk is up there for me with Will Hood and his ice cream maker. Those are my 2 favorites from the OT.
Absolutely, and understandably so. And then we have to get to number 1, and by have to, I mean. Number 1 is easily number 1, no matter what. And it's my man, R2-D2.
Yes.
And I spend a lot of time when people say, who is your favorite Star Wars character? It's easily 1A, 1B, R2, and Han Solo. It's right there, neck and neck, 1 and 1. In fact, back behind me, one of my shelves of stuff is just R2-D2s. And I don't collect newer modern stuff, but if it's R2, I need it.
I'm the same way. R2-D2 is hands down my favorite Star Wars character from the movies. I have the original Hasbro toys. I got a friend gifted me the lovely Swarovski R2 here. I have C-3PO too, but let's be honest, R2's but no, he's the best. As I like to say, every other Star Wars character gets you into trouble. R2-D2 gets you out of trouble.
Absolutely.
He's a real hero. He's a true hero. He's the wisest of us all.
He is the wisest of us all. And I really love, and this is one of those, we get these little hints along the way. And of course you can tell, stories and fill things in, especially in the era that we're in with this new kind of Star Wars storytelling. And in the sequel trilogy, there were moments when I wanted R2 out on some adventures, and we didn't get as much of that. But when I really reflect on the story of it, R2 in Rise of Skywalker ends up where he's supposed to be. He's at Leia's side.
Yep.
And, talk about breaking me. The moment in Last Jedi when when Luke goes on the Falcon and R2's there, and they're talking for a minute, and R2 plays the original hologram video, like,
oh my God.
done.
Yeah.
Like,
I
I
teared up.
wept. I wept in the movie theater at that.
Yeah.
But I love the way that arc ties up at the end of Rise of Skywalker with him at Leia's side as she dies, because to me, and I think Matthew said this in the live chat earlier, R2 for me is like an Ender's Game. Like, he's the speaker for the dead. He's the one that has been a witness to this entire thing from the opening scenes in Star Wars carrying through, and what we get in the prequels, which was he was there before that. And, and his memory was never erased. And those little seeds they plant along the way with Bail Organa, and, not erasing his memory and carrying the legacy is carried in R2-D2. And to me, from a storytelling note, that's really powerful.
For sure. And like, from just like a Star Wars as a whole note for me, I'm like, R2 is the reason why I love droids as much as I do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, period. Like, R2 was my first droid love. And I think he's a lot of people's like first introduction, to the concept of droids and everything. And like without R2, we wouldn't have Chopper. We wouldn't have BB-8.
That's right.
We wouldn't have, BD-1. We wouldn't have any of them. Like, R2-D2 and the success of R2-D2 and the charisma of R2-D2, literally a hunk of metal that just beeps.
Just beeps. That's right.
It. That's really brass tacks what he is. But we all love him. And
absolutely. And he has an appeal that goes across even the lines of fans like you and me, because, like I said, our minor league baseball team here in town several summers ago did a Star Wars night. And so they had people out, in trooper costumes, and Darth Vader was there. And there was a guy there that had an R2-D2 droid, and he stood out with the corner with a PlayStation 4 controller, like driving it around. Yeah. And of course I was excited, but even my wife, who is not into Star Wars in the least, was like, he's so cute. Like, I'm attracted to him because he's happy and he's friendly and he beeps and boops, and it communicates though. And we talk a lot recently with Mandalorian about, acting in a helmet and conveying something when there's not a face there. The same can be said for 3PO because of that startled look that, when he looks and makes a face at Leia in Last Jedi, and she says, "Don't look at me with that look," and he's like, concerned, you see it, but it's even more so with R2, and, that mournful, the mournful sounds he makes when he's sad, like, it hits and it communicates. And like you said, it's lights and beeping.
That's it. But yeah, he's the best. There's no argument. And if you do want to argue it, you're wrong.
That's right. You're just wrong.
I will send IG-11 after you.
That's right. 000 will be glad to take all of your blood if you argue about R2. Well, that is a fantastic top 7 list. And I'm so glad that you ended up with R2 at number 1. Not that I would have questioned it, because you are an expert. But you did make the right choice for number 1. I meant to ask, and I meant to bring this up at the beginning. Did you get your U.S. Postal Service set of droid stamps that got released?
I do have it.
That's so exciting. When I saw that pop up not too long ago, and a buddy of mine was like, "Hey, they're doing," I was like, "Got it, totally on it." These will be going in a frame to go with all the other things I don't have space for. Well, I always usually add at the end of our top 7 list a couple of extra selections. So I had a couple that I wanted to add in as well. I can't do a droid talk without a little bit of K2SO. K2 is one of my favorite parts of Rogue One. Rogue One is a fantastic movie overall. Speaking of things people are wrong about, Scotty J-Ro, you are wrong. But K2 is such a fun part of that movie. And that same thing, there's a wryness, there's a saltiness. Of course, it comes from Alan Tudyk, of course, and the acting that goes into that. But like, just those dry moments, the sarcastic moments that appeal to me so much, embodied in a droid like this. It was a lot that in that movie, I was sad when he had to die. Like, I was like, oh man, that was a cool character. So of course, now I'm hopeful that we're going to get maybe Cassian meeting K2, at some point in the Cassian show.
Well, speaking of, comics that you need to read, there's a comic that is about that story.
We'll see. I'm going to have to make a homework list and get you to approve it. My Star Wars comics
You told
syllabus.
that story.
That's right. See, it's there. I haven't done my research to look at it. So I love K2. The other one that I added as kind of my add-on bonus is R5D4. And to me, he's always just been, for the longest time before we got the Certain Point of View books, it was just that funny. Like, I almost feel like growing up, I had those little what if moments. So like, he looked cool. He was red and white and blue. Like, that seemed okay. And the motivator blue. And so then we get R2 and it becomes this whole thing. But he's always kind of hung out in the back of my mind as like, yeah, he's a cool droid too. And I didn't know anything about him, but he was the other astromech unit that got any significant screen time other than R2 for a good long time, which wasn't that much at all. And so for him to kind of have these canon stories that, you know, are, like you said, the side journeys or the Certain Point of View story about R5. And I know people have mixed feelings about that. They think maybe it was a little too much. Did he really sacrifice to let the other one go? It's fine. We don't have to overthink it. It's fun. But I loved the Easter egg of getting him in the cantina in Mandalorian, and in that behind the scenes documentary that they do, where they're like, yeah, it was just going to be a regular, you know, R5 unit. And then we said, no, why don't we let it be? And so they went and put, you know, the oil stains down the back so that it looked like, oh yeah, this is really him. He's just hanging around, rolling around Tatooine in the cantina. It's just fun. And it's a fun little nod to, I think, certainly vintage Star Wars and those old original versions. But for some reason, R5 has always intrigued me as well.
Very cool. It's a cool design, that conical, like almost. Yeah.
But not as obnoxious as the like more super pointy ones. Like there's a point where they get too tall. There's a lot of those in Rebels, I think.
Yeah.
But, and again, we could go on forever about droids because you do have choppers, you do have Dios, you do, you know, they're fun, they're cute. Mouse droids. Yeah, Matt said that in the chat earlier too. You know, that first time in the Death Star when Chewie roared at it and it turned around and went the other way. You're like, that's fun.
Yeah.
So we could go on forever, but we're not going to, because we're getting to about an hour. And I'm so thankful that you've taken time out of your Sunday evening to spend time with me, to talk about Star Wars, to talk about your career, which I think is so fascinating. As we wrap up, I certainly want you to have the opportunity to tell folks where they can find you on Twitter. If there's anything you want to plug that you're working on right now that you can talk about, definitely tell us what you've got going on.
Yeah, so you can find me at Twitter at Heather Antos, where I talk about Star Wars and comics and my dog. She's the best. And then I'm also at Instagram at the same thing, at Heather Antos. And then, yeah, check out the IDW Star Wars comics, just because they are aimed at all ages, at middle grade and YA, doesn't mean that you as an adult can't enjoy them. They're very enjoyable. Star Wars is for everyone in all forms.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we're telling the Star Wars Adventures, which is a cute little anthology series where we tell stories from all eras. And then we're also doing the High Republic Adventures comics in the High Republic era, where there's some really cool things coming up there. And we have a couple other cool things that are going to be announced very, very soon. And that's all I can say, but I hope you check them out.
Absolutely. Well, and very quickly before I get you out of here, I meant to do this at the top of the show. Give us a quick 2 minutes, your thoughts on Bad Batch so far. We've got 3 episodes.
Yeah. It's super fun. I'm really enjoying it. I was not expecting that first episode to be an hour long. So that was a fun surprise. And, you know, getting to see Caleb. That was really, really cool. Because again, I told that story in the comics as well, and so that was just so. I got a little emotional seeing him, my boy Caleb. But it's fun and cool, and it's interesting exploring this era from a clone's perspective, which I think like that's really fascinating and cool. And not to get too cross promotional, but actually tomorrow I'm going to be recording on another Star Wars podcast, Thank the Maker, where I will be specifically talking about Bad Batch. So if you want to get more, check that out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm all up. Anytime anybody wants to talk about Bad Batch and Star Wars and anything in general, we will gladly plug that for you. So I will definitely have to check that out and get the rest of your thoughts. But I can't thank you enough for hanging out with us tonight. To those of you in the live chat, thank you so much for sticking with us and then hanging out. To our audio listeners, regular podcast listeners, I hope you enjoy this episode as well. Congratulations again to David Drennan for winning the Jamie Cosley drawing. We will get that out in the mail to you sometime soon. And until we are all again together next week, may the force be with you always.